I still remember the first time I saw this Pokemon. Gen 2 was on the verge of releasing, and to build the hype, the developers announced they would be adding 100 new Pokemon to the franchise. As a result, new commercials aired every few days, introducing us to the new generation as a whole. It started with the new Night and Day gimmick that was to be added, and of course, as a result, the new evolutions as well. And finally, the release of two new types, Dark and Steel. As commercials ran on Kids WB, one by one, they showcased the new Pokemon that would be added to the new generation, and eventually, it got to Steelix. Man, Steelix is so badass, just look at it. From a marketing standpoint, the design hits all the targets for the demographic the Pokemon is trying to appeal to. This giant, steel-plated, snake-like dragon is absolutely impenetrable, or at least that's what I thought at the time. The head shape, teeth, and jagged structure all add to its intimidating presence. But even with this awesome design, Steelix has nowhere near the same amount of popularity that other Pokemon favorites do. Why though? I mean, it's so damn cool. Well, the marketing factors that make a Pokemon well-liked have a lot of variation involved. And while Steelix undoubtedly gets an A+ in one of these factors, it fails on all the other ones. So let's dive in and find out how Steelix is marketed and why it's not consistently ranked amongst the most beloved designs. But before we begin, we need to break down what makes a Pokemon well-liked. And while I will not go into detail about all of the categories that need to be ticked to make a Pokemon marketable, I will briefly explain the ones that are relevant to Steelix. First is the actual design of the Pokemon. This is what the Pokemon looks like. It's the colors, the shape, the identity, and so on. But at a deeper level, it also includes things like the image portrayed, the feeling the fans get, and the aura the Pokemon possesses. For example, think of a Pokemon like Gyarados. Its design is meant to be intimidating, while a Pokemon like Milotic is designed to be majestic. Subtle differences in the identity of the Pokemon, but huge in how it affects its overall design. Next is concept. Concept is similar to design, but it is not the same thing. Where design is the physical look of the Pokemon, concept is the animal the Pokemon is based off of. For example, think about Charizard, Dragonite, and Salamence. All of these are based off dragons. If you think dragons are cool, then you probably like all three of these Pokemons as well. Finally, we have competitive prowess. This is self-explanatory and it's based off how good the Pokemon is at battling. This has a huge effect on how the Pokemon is marketed because we fall in love with the ones that help us win. Think of a game like Modern Warfare. If you played that growing up, your favorite gun was probably the one that got you the most kills. It's the same thing with Pokemon. For example, most would agree that Beedrill has an absolutely stunning design, but because of how much it sucks competitively, nobody would ever list it as one of their favorite Pokemon. Now, obviously, there are a lot more factors at play than just these three, and I'll make a video explaining it very soon. But these are the three that are most relevant for today's video. So when it comes to Steelix, what worked and what didn't? Well, to be honest, it absolutely sucks competitively. I mean, just look at its stats. From the Pokedex, we can gather Steelix, the Iron Snake Pokemon, a steel and ground type. Heat from deep underground strengthens its hide, and the pressure gives its body a toughness harder than metal. Based off this Pokedex entry, we can get an idea of what the Game Freak designers were going for. A strong, defensive-minded, intimidating snake, a mon that would be similar in intrigue to Gyarados. But of course, that is not what happened. In its initial release, Steelix was quite useful. It was a defensive pivot that could switch into most battles, no doubt a useful feat. It had good top tier matchups and could switch in on both Tyranitar and Metagross, two of the strongest Pokemon in the third generation. So then what was the problem with Steelix? Its poor attack stat. There's no point being a bulky pivot if you can't dish out any damage, and that's where its downfall began. As the fourth generation introduced new gimmicks and new mons, Steelix once again fit that same archetype, a bulky wall meant to withstand a lot of damage. While the introduction of Stealth Rock was helpful, the split up of physical and special attack stats meant Steelix's enormous defense was not as useful as it once was, as special moves it was supposed to be able to resist could now avoid its defensive stats and take it out in one hit. With these glaring weaknesses, the unfortunate reality is that there were just better options that could be used in the competitive landscape. And as new generations continued to be released, it just got worse. For example, in Gen 5, the weather gimmick absolutely destroyed Steelix. Hippowdon, Ferrothorn, and Skarmory were all better options, and so Steelix eventually fell to the tier of rarely used and then never used. And even when Mega Evolutions were introduced, Steelix could not compete and fell all the way to never used as a result. Now let me clarify, Steelix is not a bad Pokemon, but in a competitive, highly skilled, highly strategic version of Pokemon, only the best of the best retain usefulness. And sadly, Steelix was just not one of these, as there were better options for defensive walls that could hit harder or defensive support Pokemon that could help their team in a much better way. And that is part of the reason why Steelix is not mentioned at the top of favorite Pokemon lists. The competitive prowess of any Pokemon has an enormous effect on its marketing capability and overall likability. We as players become attached to the mons that help us win. Because Pokemon battling is such a big part of the franchise, any mon that can aid in this feat becomes immediately well liked. The better a Pokemon is at battling, the more likely it is to be your favorite, that's for certain. But sometimes, your specific battle style or an extra quirk or gimmick can also be a factor in the Pokemon's likability. Think Rillaboom or Shed Ninja. So it's not so much about the raw strength or knockout ability of the Pokemon, but instead about how useful it is. You see, Pokemon has two types of players. Casual fans like me, who just choose their favorite mons and play the story mode of the game, and pros, people that play competitively, the people who max out EVs and build a team centered around a whole strategy and move pool. This second group of players are the ones that even casual fans such as myself look up to. They depict the trends that air in the Pokemon world by creating strategies centered around Pokemon that can help them win games, promoting these mons further as a result. But if a Pokemon performs poorly, well, the opposite happens. It will get underused, underpromoted, and eventually fall off the relevancy list. You see, Steelix had an amazing design and an amazing concept, yes, but it had very poor viability competitively. I mean, how can you give a giant metal snake who is 34 feet tall and 16,000 pounds an attack stat of only 85? It just doesn't make sense. And as a result, people were quite disappointed once they started using Steelix. For all of you that grew up playing Generation 1, think back to Onix. In the anime, it was like this huge rock snake, the signature Pokemon of Brock, and it just looked so cool. But once the games were released, people were utterly shocked. Onix was so bad, it ruined the ability for anybody to use him, and people immediately disliked it as a result. While Steelix is nowhere near the same level of disappointing, it has the same problem. An amazing design with underwhelming competitive capability. But that's just part of the reason why Steelix isn't more marketable. The other reason is because of negative promotion in the anime. Negative promotion is when a product or service is either not promoted or displayed in a negative way. This can be done in several ways and absolutely hurts the marketability of whatever is in question. Negative promotion applies to Pokemon as well, and some examples that come to mind are being weak competitively, being a pushover in the anime, oversaturating the amount of the Pokemon you can obtain, or just simply having a bad portrayal. In Steelix's case, the game did a good job of building off of scarcity, as you needed a metal coat and the ability to trade to obtain him. It also did a good job of depicting its strength, as the gym leader Jasmine used Steelix as her ace. So then what was the problem? In the anime, it was not poorly portrayed, it was not made to look weak, and it does not seem useless. But the problem was that it was just not promoted. Across the whole anime, Steelix makes like 10 appearances max. And aside from Brock and Jasmine, who else has a Steelix? Aside from the battles it won as an Onix, what impressive victories does it have under its belt? The answer is, it doesn't. It's not heavily seen in the anime, it's not heavily seen in the games, and aside from its high defensive stat, it's not very good competitively. Due to this, people don't build teams around it, which again makes less people see it. To market a Pokemon successfully, to become one of the most beloved mons, you need 4 key pieces. They must have a great design, they must at least be viable competitively, they must have a good reputation, be it from the anime or how other people talk about it, and they must have something unique about them. Steelix sadly just misses the mark on too many of these factors, and as a result, even though it has such a cool design, it will never fit the bill to be a fan favorite.